So today we are going to begin a service called OGs of the OT. And if you don't know what those two things mean, ask someone younger than you are maybe. But anyway, so OT is Old Testament, and OGs, you can look that up. Oh, nice work. So we're going to start our series with a guy named Abraham. So you know him as one of the most prominent figures of the Old Testament. But here is a fun fact. He is also one of the most prominent names in the New Testament. Did you know this? So check out this list of passages. So he is in the New Testament somewhere around 30 times, which is a lot more than some of the 12 disciples are even mentioned. That's pretty wild. Faithful Jews were called 2,000 years ago, 1,900 years ago. Faithful Jews who were Christians were called sons and daughters of Abraham. Interesting. In the book of Luke. And they were given the promise that Abe would greet them when they walked into the next life. That's pretty interesting. And then there's a passage where Jesus is talking with a group of people, and they say, hey, don't give us any trouble. We are children of Abraham. And then Jesus says, if you're really children of Abraham, why are you trying to kill me? Because you don't do the things that Abraham did. If you were his kids, you would follow his example, and you are not doing that. And then they said, well, we've never been slaves of anyone, which is kind of a unique thing to say because they've been slaves of everyone, right? And then he says, you're slaves to sin. And in fact, your father is not Abraham, it's the devil, based on how you guys are acting. Wow, right? So they're kind of saying, hey, we got Abraham on our team, and Jesus is like, no, he's on my team. Like, what are you guys talking about? And then in the New Testament, we have this pattern of Abraham as the spiritual leader of spiritual Israel, right? And the example of faith. And not just the physical lineage of people, right? Okay, so also interesting, one time Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. And so this was a moment when he was saying, oh, by the way, I'm God. And so he was claiming divinity, which made everybody a little bit stirred up who did not believe in his divinity. But it's interesting that he mentioned Abraham in that moment. So let's look at Abraham's story today. We're going to start in Genesis 12. So if you have a Bible, you can turn over there. If you don't have a Bible, I highly recommend them. Life-changing, and the best choice you could ever make is spend some time in there. So the Lord said to Abraham, Genesis 12:1, and notice it says Abram, so his name was changed when he was 99 years old to Abraham. Abram means daddy, or dad, and Abraham means, wow, big daddy. Like you're the dad of a whole bunch of people. That's what that means. So he said, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I'll show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I'll make your name great, and you will be a blessing. And then look at this. All people on earth will be blessed through you. How did that happen? Through Jesus coming, right? The descendant. So God promises Abraham three things in those verses: land and fruit and blessing. He would inhabit a place where God set apart for him. He would have a bunch of kids. And then that wasn't the only point. God would bless the whole planet through him. I feel like as I run around with Christians, we need to learn a lesson from that. God put you where you are for a reason. He wants you to bear spiritual fruit. And he wants to bless you, not so that your life is happy. That's fine. But if he's blessed you, he's blessing you to be a blessing to others. We can't be a dead end. But I feel like sometimes Christians feel like, well, I just got to make it to heaven. I got to survive, and then I'll be in heaven, and that's my blessing. And I feel like we need to learn from this example of, no. God put you here for a reason. He wants you to have spiritual fruit. That's all over the New Testament. And he wants your life to bless others, not just be for you. Now is when you say amen. Okay, good job. So God makes these promises to Abraham. Abraham's happy. He goes his merry way. And then on the road, he starts making critical mistakes. So he travels with his wife. Evidently, his wife is beautiful. And he says, okay, Sarai, so here's the thing. When we go into a town, tell them that you're my sister so that they won't kill me. It doesn't sound too harmful, but it ends up being a real difficult problem in chapter 12 and then again in chapter 20. And so she actually ends up in the king's palace twice, 2 different countries, and curses come on them because they've done this wrong. And then they call in Abraham and say, like, what are you doing to me? Like, why are you messing with me like this? So fast forward to Genesis 15, 11 years after the promise of land and fruit and blessing. Abraham was 75 when he got this blessing, right? Now he's 86. So he's getting up there in years, and he's counting the days, and he's like, so God, you promised me offspring and fruit and all this blessing, and what gives? I don't see it. And so Genesis 15, God says to him, do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. I'm your great reward. I think that's interesting right there that he doesn't say, I'm going to give you a great reward. I am your reward. And Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? So God took him outside and said, hey, look up at the stars. And I wonder if he was like, look at all the stars I made. These are some of my favorites. I wish I could see the video of this moment, right? And he says, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you could count them. And then he said, your offspring are going to be like that. And I love this verse. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. He did the right thing. He said, yes, Lord, I get it. Yes, Lord, I trust you. And then Genesis 15:8, Abram says, well, how will I know this is actually going to happen? And then a really interesting thing happens. So God says, go get some animals because we're going to make a covenant. And so in the ancient Near East, there's a covenant where you take a sacrificial animal, you divide it in half, one half over there, one half over there, and then I'm going to walk between the 2 parts after you and I make our agreement. So Scott and I are going to have an agreement. I'm going to give him half my land. He's going to give me half his money. And then we're going to shake on it. That's what we would do in our culture. In this culture, Scott and I would walk between the halves, and we walk back between the halves, and now it is signed in blood. Like, you cannot go back. Under penalty of death, we're not breaking this covenant. What's interesting, though, in this case with God and Abraham, it's a different kind of covenant. It's called, so this one is called a suzerainty covenant, and that means a superior and a vassal or a peasant have a similar agreement. But what's interesting is the peasant really doesn't have much to give to the king. The king has everything to give to the peasant, and that's what's happening. And so God walks between the things, and Abraham doesn't. In fact, he puts Abraham in a deep sleep, and basically he is saying to Abraham, I will do it. I promise to do my part, even if you don't. Even if you don't have the self-discipline, even if you don't have the faith, even if you blow it, and he did. He says, I'm going to keep my promise to you no matter what, regardless of your performance. I think that's really beautiful, and it shows the grace of God. And I think he was saying to Abraham, I'm for you, unconditionally, relentlessly, passionately for you. I think this is a lesson for some of you in this room. You may feel like things are very contractual with God. If I wake up and I do my devotions at 7, God will like me. If I do these things in order, then God is going to do things that will bless my life. That's not really how Christianity works. That's not how our God works. So he will do things in your life because he loves you and because of his grace. And you will blow it. And it's important to say, Lord, I blew it. But it's not contractual. He's like, okay, great. Now that you admitted that you blew it, now I love you again. That's not how it works. And so in Abraham's life, he's like, I am going to work out good through you and in you in spite of you. It's pretty neat. So now don't take that as like license to be like, ooh, I don't have to do anything anymore. That's not how it works. Don't take this too far. But what you can do is take the burden off your back of performance and of keeping God happy, and instead say, I want to love the Lord and I'll do my best serving him. And I know that if I blow it, he still loves me. He will still work in my life. Right on? Okay. So Hagar and Sarah, this awesome thing happens, the covenant and the stars, and this is beautiful. And then inside of that same year, they get impatient and blow it. So Sarah says, hey, take my handmaid Hagar, she's my servant, and Abram, you can have a child through her, and this will be great. We'll just check off that box of having the descendants that God has given us, has promised us. So chapter 16, 1 and 2, that happens, and it goes poorly. It goes bad. Do you know why? Because they're taking God's plan and they're doing it their way. And they're trying to make God look good and get him off the hook because God wasn't coming through, so we better take it into our own hands and make it work. I've done that. So it doesn't work well. In fact, if we look at the conflict in the Middle East, a lot of the conflict stems to the disagreement between these two brothers, Ishmael being born and then Isaac being born. And so I remember there was a meeting, maybe it was probably like 15 years ago, with the Minister of Tourism from Israel was here speaking in LA at the Bonaventure, and somebody said, can't you guys just get along? Basically, like, hey, it's now, it's not 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, come on. And he said, you guys don't understand, this is a family feud that's been going on for 4,000 years, so it's not so easy to solve. Okay, so let's look at Genesis 17. 13 more years go by. So now Abraham is 99 years old. So when he first got the promise, 75, he's like, okay, we can barely squeak by and maybe have a kid. Then he's 86 and he's like, woo, not so much, right? And it still hasn't really happened. The promise has not totally been fulfilled, and now he's 99. And it says, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. And then I'll make a covenant between me and you and increase your numbers. The same thing, repeated again. And this time he says, you're no longer going to be called Abram. I'm going to call you Abraham, because I'm going to make you the father of many nations. And then he goes on to say, this is my covenant with you and your descendants. Every male among you must be circumcised. So this is how that covenant was first formed. And then he said, as for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her that, but call her Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. Now picture yourself 99 years old hearing that, and she's 90, and you're like, really? And then Abraham fell face down. He laughed. That's the name of Isaac, the son they're going to have. He laughs. Interesting. And he said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at 90? And yes, it happened. Sarah conceived. Isaac is born. His name means he laughs. And I think they laughed. I think all their neighbors laughed, all their family, everybody who met them. I was looking for some paintings, some pictures of like Abraham and Sarah with their son. It's crazy. I didn't even put them up there because they're not that good. Someone needs to do a good painting. But picture someone who's, parents who are 91 and 100 with a newborn. That's what the Lord did. And here's the crazy part. So if that wasn't hard enough, it was after he was freshly circumcised. So I think it's just this other level of like, what? It's like this clear, funny obvious miracle, and they had trouble trusting the Lord that he could actually do the impossible. But I think that we are a lot like Abraham and Sarah. Some of you have been listening to the story and being like, yeah, I identify with that, because we're not good at waiting. And sometimes God has shown us what he wants to do in our lives. He's given us certain gifts, certain opportunities, and then nothing happens. And then we're sitting there saying, like, Lord, what are you doing? Nothing is happening right now. And here's what he wants to say to you and me. He wants to do things through our lives, but he wants to do them his way. And sometimes we make up for the lack that we see in God's attention or his power or his timeliness. And we try to hurry stuff up. And we try to produce ministry. We try to produce fruit. We try to, make this stuff happen. And I think it can look good on the outside, but it's not going to last eternally. God wants to do some things in your life and through your life that are supernatural and eternal, which means they have to do with people, relationships, people coming to know Christ, people starting a church in a group of people in an apartment building that may be overlooked. That's what he wants to do, his way, his time. I think it was fun that you shared about accidental churches starting. That's a lot different than beating your head against a wall to make a church happen because you just know it has to happen. And the Lord's like, no, I want you to do it this way. And there's a different way of doing things where we can stay in step with the Spirit and have, hopefully, the patience that the Lord has. And man, I get impatient. And I know that some of you are like me. And I can't remember who said this, but somebody once said, God doesn't need your help. He wants your trust and devotion. Sometimes we try to help God. He doesn't need your help. I've had conversations with him that are kind of like, Lord, so what's going on? Help me to see this from your perspective. Or, Lord, why is this taking so long? I don't get it. That's great. I mean, that's what the Psalms are all about, are questions like that. But when we take it back from the Lord and we go like, I'm just going to do it my way, it ends up being a mess. And that happened more and more and more in Abraham and Sarah's life. So then, this should be the end of the story, right? Hey, happy ending. They have the child. He goes on to... And now the final test comes. How many of you hated tests in school? Okay? I'm glad I didn't have this one, because this one is heavy. So God says, so Abraham, you've been blessed with this child, this son of the promise. I want you to give him back to me. Not spiritually, I want you to sacrifice him to me physically. And we, like, in this day and age, we would say that's barbaric, that's wrong, that's this, that's that. In the ancient Near East, this was a common practice of sacrificing children, right? So this was something from the other cultures around, and Abraham was like, I wonder what I do with this one, right? So let me show you a different picture, very different than that one. Yesterday I got to do a child dedication out in Calabasas, and we had a blast. This is little Havana Marvea, and she put on a show. So she was one yesterday, and she smiled the whole time. But funny, as we were getting started, she had this massive tantrum. And so mom had to take her into the house, and we had to start without the baby even there, hoping that this would all work out. And then she recovered. She was fine. She had 2 plastic spoons that I guess were her favorite thing. And then she was just happy through the whole thing. But the reason why I'm showing that picture is this was some parents giving the child to the Lord and saying, Lord, bless this child. This child is a blessing, a miracle from you. And we give her back to you for a life of love and service. I love doing baby dedications. It was a blast. Now, what God asked Abraham to do was next level beyond that. It was like, you're not going to get him back. Give me the child of promise and trust me. I've never had to do that level of trust with God, my Father. Now, somehow in God's sovereignty and plan, he had this all planned out, and he needed Abraham to go on this walk with him and on a walk with his son. So he's walking with his son Isaac, and Isaac said, "Where are we going, Dad?" "We're going to go make sacrifices to the Lord." "Okay, where's the sacrifice?" That's what Isaac said. And Abraham's looking at him like, no, he said, "God will provide." I think that's really a beautiful statement of faith. Like, even in the hardest thing he's ever had to do, he thought waiting was hard. Now this is even harder. And he walks up on the mountain thinking, I got to give this kid back after all this. And then the Lord provides another way, and there's an angel and a ram that is the actual sacrifice. And again, it was credited to Abraham as righteousness. You trusted God. You did it right. You didn't take it all into your own hands. Because in that case, Abraham's temptation would have been, there's got to be another way. I got to make this happen my way. And you have a meeting with Sarah, like, let's figure out something else. Let's figure out something else we can give God, not that. Right? But God used that moment in Abraham's life for him, for the nation of Israel, for Christianity, for all of us to learn from the faith of a human being who's fallible, who blew it. He blew it. And yet, God used him in some really, really key moments. Have you ever wondered why Abraham is called the father of faith for Jews and Christians? Where does that even come from? I mean, there's all these stories in the Old Testament. There's all these people that I might choose over him. I mean, I might choose Joshua, or I might choose Ezra or Samuel, and I'm like, I like those guys better. But I'm going to tell you why we call him that. There are two main reasons, and there's a passage that shows these to us from the New Testament. God told him to leave everything he knew and go to a new place. He didn't have a conversation with God. He didn't make excuses. He didn't make another plan. He just went, not knowing where he was going. So God said, I've got a promised land for you. Pack up and go. He went. That's faith. Next level. And then, later on, he offered, well, God said, I want you to offer your son back to me. And he said, okay, I'll do it. And those two moments, the leaving and the giving up, are some of the greatest acts of faith in the entire Bible and in the entire history of humanity. And so based on those, we look at Abraham and we go like, that's an example of faith. Right? Are you with me? Okay. So we're going to turn to Hebrews, and I'm going to show you where this comes from, and then we're going to wrap it up. So as you're turning to Hebrews, just a little joke for you. When Abraham makes coffee, how does he do it? He brews it. Okay. So Hebrews 11:8. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as an inheritance, obeyed and went. Look at this line. Even though he did not know where he was going. He trusted him who is true, not knowing where he was going. Right? So some of you need to hear this. God will lead you to go somewhere and you don't know what it is all about. But you do know what he is all about. So you can go into the place where you don't know what's going to happen because you do know him. That's really the only thing Abraham knew when he left his hometown was, I know the God who asked me to go. That's all he knew. He didn't know how it would play out. He didn't know any of the details, and yet he went. Hebrews 11:11, by faith Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. So even though it's completely impossible, she said, well, God must know how to do the impossible. It's nuts to me, but God said it. I believe it. That settles it, right? And so from this one man, and I love this phrase, he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. Wow. And then jumping forward, verse 17, by faith Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, which is a type, a pattern, a picture of God giving his only son for us. And even though God had said to him, through Isaac, your offspring will be reckoned, Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And in a matter of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. So, you know, how many of you are parents? So yesterday, my son Josh turned 23, came back from college, and we just whipped it up. We celebrated. I made some of the best steaks I've ever made yesterday, I got to tell you, with baked potatoes, with Celtic salt. It was real. But anyway, so we were celebrating Josh, and the way that I look at my kids, there's something special. Like, I know that God has given them to us as a gift. It's not always easy, but it's amazing. Picture Abraham and Sarah looking at this kid who was promised and they waited for half their lives. And then picture them looking at this kid who's a miracle in many levels. And then picture them almost losing him and having him restored back to them. I just think there's something powerful and beautiful in just picturing their gaze and their love for that particular young man. Wow, right? And I hope that we as parents can have that kind of a wow when we see our kids, even when they make us nuts, where we can be thankful that they are gifts from above. So I want to have the band come back up. And what a story, right? The story of Abraham. And we have done in one day what, could have easily taken 4 or 5 weeks to do it right. If you want to know more about Abraham, dig into the story. We're doing a devotional on the Bible app this week. You can learn some more about his story. Quite a story of faith. But I want to ask just a couple of questions. One is this: how is your faith right now? How does faith grow? There's only one way that faith grows. It's when it's tested. Shoot, right? Darn it, but that's how it works. There's only one way that muscles grow. It's when they go to the gym or when they exercise or get stretched. There isn't really another way. And so God does want to encourage, grow, strengthen your faith, which often includes testing it to say, how much do you trust me? That's just how it goes. And I remember our kids when they were little, coming to the edge of, the bed or whatever, and you say like, jump, I'll catch you. That's the picture I have of God the Father with us. And he says, will you take a risk? I will catch you. What if you don't catch me? I will catch you. And we have to trust his goodness and his strength. So as we talked about Abraham, as we talked about Sarah, what do you think is your takeaway? And so rather than, Pastor Kirk saying, here's what you have to do today, Lynn, just say, Lord, what do you want me to take away from today? And a couple of things to think about. Maybe you've been trying to do God's thing your way. And he wants to say, give me the wheel. Stop trying to help me. Let me work in your life and let me do it my way. Maybe the Lord is asking you to leave something behind. Just like Abraham left his hometown, his identity, what he thought would be the white picket fence and the career, and he just left it. Because God said, I want you to go follow me. And I'll show you on the way what that means. Maybe you need to leave something behind. And the last one is really hard. Maybe there's something precious that God is saying, I want you to give that to me. And you're saying, no, not that. And the Lord's saying, I want you to give that to me, and I want you to leave it in my hands. And if I give it back to you or not, that's not up to you. But trust me. So let's stay in that spirit of prayer, and we're going to sing another song.